Hello, boys and girls. Today I'm taking another look at Stefan Molyneux and his views on climate change. This particular video that I'm pulling this from is about the 97% consensus among climate scientists about man-made anthropomorphic climate change. I'm not disagreeing with Stefan's views on climate change. In fact, I'm sort of on the fence myself about climate change science. Not being a climatologist myself, I tend to listen to the scientific consensus the way that I do on other scientific issues like global warming. Global warming or evolution. I'm not an evolutionary biologist. The only thing that I can do is look at the available evidence from peer-reviewed papers about climate change and evolution and every other scientific advance that we can read about. I mean, all of our scientific advances are brought to us through peer-reviewed journals. So let's take a look at what Stefan has to say about consensus in general and science.
But it certainly means that consensus is not the same as truth. And consensus in science is completely ridiculous. You know, at the beginning of the days of Copernicus or Galileo, Tycho Brahe, 97% of astronomers believed that the sun went around the Earth.
All right, here's a major problem with his view on consensus. There was no such thing as scientific consensus in the days of Copernicus. There was no peer-reviewed scientific process. There were no peer-reviewed journals. That's a fairly recent development in the scientific world. And in fact, you could make a good claim that there was no such thing as science before 400 or 500 years ago, the Enlightenment. That the scientific method was not what natural philosophers, as they were termed, used to come to conclusions about the world. The scientific method is a very specific method that did not exist back then. So there could not have been scientific consensus in the time of Copernicus.
The fact that there's consensus doesn't make anything true. Nonetheless, 97% consensus is really a strong and powerful argument that, although it is an argument from authority, carries a great deal of weight.
All right, pretty much all discussion about science from non-scientists has to be discussions from the point of view of authority, right? I'm not a climatologist. I'm not a evolutionary biologist. I'm not a whatever it is. I'm not an astrophysicist. So pretty much all of these opinions about science has to come from experts in the field. And the way that experts in a particular field put their ideas out and have them confirmed is through scientific journals. You put your information out there, other scientists try to replicate your experiment, and if they are able to replicate your experiment, then that means that there is consensus that gets published in peer-reviewed journals, and that's where consensus comes from. Science is definitely, well, let's listen to Neil deGrasse Tyson here talk about consensus.
Science doesn't operate.
Sure, if you want to say
you know it.
Science doesn't operate on consensus.
No, science operates as the
it operates on a consensus of experiments.
Well, there you go. Consensus of experiments. That's what I'm talking about now. You publish your experiment in a peer-reviewed journal. Other scientists attempt to recreate your experiment, and then you get to say that that is now a accepted point of view or accepted fact, and at the various highest level, an accepted theory. Once it becomes accepted theory, that means that pretty much all scientists in the world at that time, given the available data that we have, accept that theory. The theory of gravity, the theory of evolution, these are theories that are accepted as explanations for the set of data that we've come across as a species. So the interesting thing about this is at a certain point, Stefan himself asks for scientific consensus in the same way. So let's take a look at that.
Crazy. Now, of course, other people outside scientists requested the data. One of the basics of the peer-reviewed scientific method is that I need to see your data to make sure you didn't make any mistakes or lie.
And that is exactly what scientific consensus consists of. You give me your experimental information, your data set, you give me the parameters of your experiment, and then I try to reproduce them, given the set of data that you've given me. And if I can reproduce it, then we have scientific consensus. So Stefan himself is asking for scientific consensus as the basis for which to analyze data. And yet in the same video, he said that science isn't done through consensus. So anyway, I think that he was mistaken about the scientific method. And that has no bearing at all on whether I agree with him about climate change in general.